My name is Josh Settlage. I'm a strength coach and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu brown belt, and for the last 8 years, I've been working with hundreds of grappling athletes across the world, helping them get brutally strong, pack on slabs of muscle, and never gas out on the mat. In today's episode, I'm breaking down all of the questions that you guys sent in on how to maximize muscle growth while also still rolling hard on the mat multiple times per week. And without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the first question. First question from Clement. What kind of sets is the most adapted to build muscle? I think the other way we can look at this is like, what kind of sets work best to build muscle? And there's a lot of different types of sets that you can do out there. You can just do straight sets where it's like, hey, I did 3 sets of 10, all at the same weight, and that was my workout, or that was the working sets for that exercise. You can do pyramid sets where you maybe start at a light weight and then work yourself up to a top set and then work yourself back down. You can do drop sets where you do, say, 3 sets of 10, and then on the very last set, you drop the weight just a little bit by 10% maybe, and then you try to do, 8 to 10 more reps. There's so many different types of sets out there that you can do, and honestly, they all can work for muscle growth just as long as there are some key things that are maintained. The biggest driver for muscle growth is going to be mechanical tension. That is the most important thing. Another good indicator, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a driver of muscle growth, but this is an indicator that you're getting a good training stimulus in your workout. You're sending a good signal to your body to build muscle, and that's going to be metabolic stress or getting a really good pump. So as long as you're doing an exercise that tends to work through a pretty large range of motion, because research has shown that working through a larger range of motion tends to have better overall impact on hypertrophy when compared to partial range of motion. So if you're doing a quarter squat or a 90-degree angle squat, that is going to have less of a muscle growth stimulus as opposed to doing a full ass to grass squat. So as long as you're working through a full range of motion, as long as you're getting a ton of mechanical tension on the targeted muscles throughout the set, as long as you're getting a pretty good pump. And the other thing I would say is making sure that you're getting pretty close to failure, like staying within 1 to 2 reps away from failure. As long as all 4 of those things are taken care of, you can kind of do any exercise or any type of set that you want, and you're going to get some form of a muscle building stimulus. So in my workout this morning, I did some Bulgarian split squats, I did some good mornings, I did some Cossack squats, and for the Cossack squats, I did 3 sets of 5 reps on each side. And the number of reps that you need to do per set to stimulate muscle growth has a pretty big range. You can stimulate muscle growth with doing as little as 5 reps per set and as many as 30 reps per set. So in this workout that I did this morning, I was doing 3 sets of 5 on each side. And I just made sure, like, hey, I want to make sure I'm getting pretty close to failure. So that 5th rep should be really, really freaking difficult. Wanted to make sure that I applied a good amount of mechanical tension. So really making sure that I'm straining through those ranges of motions, making sure that I'm using a load that is difficult and is like actually heavy. Wanted to make sure that I was getting at least a little bit of some metabolic stress. Again, metabolic stress isn't a driver of muscle growth, so it's not the most important thing. It's just a good indicator that, you're on the right track, so to speak. So I was getting a little bit of a pump in my lower body, and then just making sure that I was working through the largest range of motion possible. And so with that workout, I just did straight sets. I did 3 sets of 5, all at the same weight, and I made sure all 4 of those conditions were met, which to me is a good sign that, hey, I'm in a good spot to be building some muscle here. So to answer your question, Clement, the kind of sets that you do, whether you're doing straight sets, pyramid sets, drop sets, dog crap sets, there is a training method called dog crap training, which is pretty fun to do. Regardless of what type of set that you're doing, as long as you're meeting those 4 criteria, you're probably sending a really strong signal to your body to build muscle. Next question from Rui. How often do you stretch and how flexible are you? So what's great about hypertrophy training is that if you do it correctly, hypertrophy training can also be mobility and flexibility training. And a lot of that comes by way of working through a full range of motion. Now, I don't think that only doing hypertrophy training I don't think that covers all your bases as far as mobility goes. I think it's still important to do other forms of mobility training outside of the gym. either on the mat at Jiu Jitsu or just at home after your workout. But if you're working through a large range of motion, if you're using some heavier loads and you're really, getting a good stretch on all of those exercises, you are going to help improve your mobility quite a bit. So doing deep ass to grass squats with heavy weights over time will help improve your mobility. Doing full range of motion dumbbell bench press will over time improve the mobility of your shoulders and your pecs. Doing full range of motion pullovers and all that stuff. So as far as how often do I personally stretch, I try to do at least 10 to 20 minutes of mobility work every single day. About 5 minutes or so, or 10 minutes or so of that total 20 minutes is done right before my workout as part of my warm-up. And then usually before I go to bed, I do another 5 to 10 minutes. If I'm training on the mat, I usually like to try to stay a little bit extra after class and get another 5 to 10 minutes of stretching, because I'm already super warmed up. I'm already really sweaty. Like, it just feels good to kind of like stretch and get into some of those deep ranges while I'm already feeling warmed up and loose. So I just spread out 20 minutes or so of stretching and mobility work all throughout the day. Next question from Great Effing Day. What a great handle. That's awesome. Best plan for 45 plus hobbyist that is a firefighter doing shift work. Dude, I'm working with someone right now who is, he's not 45, but he's an older guy. He's a master's athlete. He's in your exact same position right here. So when it comes to building muscle as you're getting older, all the principles still apply. You still want to get tons of mechanical tension. You still want to get a decent pump. You still want to work pretty close to failure, like staying within 1 to 2 reps away from failure on your working sets. And you want to work through a full range of motion. So regardless if you're an 18-year-old who has nothing else to do but just go to the gym, or you're a 45-year-old firefighter who's trying to balance firefighting, jiu-jitsu, training in the gym, as long as you meet those 4 criteria, that's a pretty good sign that you are stimulating a good amount of hypertrophy. Now, I've worked with a ton of Masters athletes over the years. I've coached a lot of guys to compete at Masters Worlds, and I got a couple guys right now that are gearing up for Masters Worlds, and some of those guys are firefighters. And especially with firefighters, the thing that I've found that has made it most difficult for them is the shift work. You don't always have a consistent sleep schedule, and that can really wreck your recovery. And so what I typically try to encourage a lot of the firefighters that I work with is like, hey, when you're at the station, I totally get that there's no guarantee that you're going to get a perfect 7 to 8 hour night of sleep. If you do, that's fantastic. But when that bell rings and that siren goes off, like, it doesn't matter whether you've slept 7 hours or 2 hours, you got to get up, get on the engine, and get out there. So what I try to do is I try to make sure that, like, hey, let's do as much as we can to take care of all the other things that contribute to your recovery while you're at the station. Making sure your nutrition is on check, making sure that we're getting blood work done about once every 6 months. If you're a little bit older, like you're 45, you could probably even benefit from getting your blood work done once every 3 months, but just making sure that, like, hey, are there any hormonal issues that are sprouting up that we can kind of tackle early, so that way they don't have any big negative lasting impact on your health. Making sure that your micronutrients are being taken care of. We try to do as much of that stuff as we can, some of that low-hanging fruit, while you're at the station. Then on your off days, I really encourage them to make sure, like, let's have a solid routine built for those off days. So if you're a firefighter and you're doing 2 days on, 4 days off, so you got 48 hours at the station, then you have 4 complete days off of work, try to have a routine built in on those 4 days. Know about the days that you're gonna go to jiu-jitsu, know about the days you're gonna go to the gym, have a pretty strict routine with sleep if you can, like doing everything you can to make sure that you're catching up on any of the recovery that you might have missed while you were at the station. It can be pretty tough sometimes when things get busy as a firefighter, or if you're working in law enforcement. I've worked with a lot of people in law enforcement as well. When you're on the job, like, all the I don't want to say the science doesn't apply, because it does apply, but your priorities are just completely shifted. When you're at the station, whether you're at the fire station or the police station, and you're on the clock, like, you got to answer the call. Like, whenever that call comes, you got to be ready. So it would be really difficult to always have the perfect, optimized sleep routine and all of that stuff. And so I understand that when you're at the station, that's what you got to do. So let's make sure that you're taking care of all the other low-hanging fruit that you can to help with your recovery. And then when you're not at the station, have a routine in place that's going to further help you recover from all the stressors that you're going through. When it comes to what you do with training, you do kind of have to be a little bit more flexible and a little bit more adaptable. If you're 18 years old and you're like literally all you do is just hang out at the gym and go to jiu-jitsu, you have a pretty consistent day-to-day life where you can build in a lot of structure around your training sessions because there isn't much variation. And that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. When I was 18 years old, I literally would work out for 3 hours every single day, and I absolutely loved it. It was the best thing ever. But if you're a firefighter, you have other responsibilities. You got other things going on, especially when you're at the station, that make it difficult to have that routine and that structure. And so I encourage a lot of the firefighters that I work with, where it's like, hey, the workouts that you're gonna do at the station, there's a lot of variability involved. So, obviously there's variations around what equipment you have available at the station. But for example, like there was one guy that I was working with. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu and he's a firefighter. And so some of the workouts I'd have him do at the fire station were like, hey, let's do some GPP work. Let's drag a sled. If you got access to a sandbag, let's do a few sets of like some heavy sandbag carries or some heavy sandbag cleans. Let's make sure that we're mixing in some form of some body weight exercises in there, pull-ups, dips, push-ups, all that stuff. And if anything isn't feeling, rock solid for that day, that's okay. Like we can adapt it and move on. So I wouldn't necessarily schedule a guy that is going through like a really busy fire season, so to speak, where at the fire station, like they're doing tons and tons of work. They're going out on tons and tons of calls. The days he's going to the fire station, I wouldn't say like, hey, next week, get ready because we're going to max out your 1-rep max Zercher squat. It's like I wouldn't schedule that for him because you never know what they're going to be going through leading up to that workout or what is even going on that day. They may just not be prepared for that. So we have some general things that we want to check off the list, so to speak, but we also want to make sure that we're being flexible based around the kind of stressors that that athlete is going through when they're on the job at the fire station. Next question, should I train the abs every day? So this is a question from Inara Diaz Gontijo. So you can train muscles in different muscle groups every single day. That I wouldn't say that's necessarily the best way to go about it because we need to make sure that any training that we do, whether it's on the mat or in the gym, we got to make sure that it respects this thing called the stimulus recovery adaptation curve or the SRA curve. The training that you do in the gym and on the mat, that is your training stimulus. And when you apply a training stimulus, you can almost think of it as like you're applying a stressor to your body. So you want to train your biceps, you lift some heavy ass weight to strain and stress your biceps. Your body then goes through a recovery process to help repair and rebuild those damaged tissues, kind of restore the body. And then it goes through what's called adaptation. And then adaptation is where you start to be better prepared for that type of stressor in the future. So for example, you stress your biceps by curling a 30-pound dumbbell, you're a little bit sore afterwards, your body goes through the recovery process, then it adapts. So then the next time you pick up a 30-pound dumbbell, it's still difficult, but you can do maybe a couple more reps. Or it feels not as difficult and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna pick up a 40-pound dumbbell and test myself against that. And so when it comes to whether or not you should train a particular muscle group every day, the issues with that is that you do start to run into some problems with your ability to recover. Because if you train a muscle group really hard on Monday, and then you train it really, really hard again on Tuesday, you're gonna have a little bit of recovery because you're gonna sleep the night before, but sometimes one night of sleep isn't enough to fully recover that muscle group. So the only way you're gonna be able to train a muscle group every single day is if you decrease the intensity of that training stimulus to a point where it's easy enough to recover from day to day. And there are times where that would be appropriate, and there are also times where that wouldn't be appropriate. So a time where that would be appropriate would be like, hey, if you're prepping for a jiu-jitsu competition you pretty much need to be doing as much jiu-jitsu as possible up to the point at which you can recover. And so some guys are training twice a day, 5 days a week. That's a ton of training. Of course, they're not going to be 100% recovered, going into each session, but they're doing the best they can to be as recovered as possible. That way they can get through the training week Monday through Friday, and then they have like 2 really big rest days on Saturday and Sunday. Now, to answer your question about should I train the abs every day, your abs, if you do like a really, really tough ab workout, your abs will be absolutely fried and they'll be super, super sore. And just because, they're sore, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't train them, but there is a balance to be had of like, hey, is it okay to continue to train this particular muscle group if I still feel some of that residual soreness? So it's good to train muscle groups multiple times per week because you get multiple stimuli or multiple bouts of that training stimulus to that muscle group multiple times per week. However, there is a limit to that. I don't think that necessarily training a particular muscle group every single day, let me rephrase that. I don't necessarily think that training a muscle group at maximum intensity every single day is a good idea because you do start to run into some recovery problems. However, you can just sprinkle in a little bit of training for those particular muscle groups every single day. So a good example would be like for myself when I'd injured my knee, even if I wasn't doing a quote unquote lower body workout, I would still do some of my rehab exercises. I'd do at least something for my knee every single day. It was very low stimulus, very low intensity, something that was enough to give me a little bit of a training stimulus, but not so much that it would take me multiple days to recover from. So hope that answers your question. Next question from Daniel. What do you think about the science-based lifting community? I feel like it really helps. Or what do you think about science-based lifting? I feel like it really helps. This is a good question, and I feel kind of torn on this in some aspects because I think that science-based lifting and kind of like what that has grown to become, I think has done a lot of good for the strength and conditioning industry. And at the same time, I also think it's done a lot of bad. When I first started coming into strength and conditioning and I first started working out, there was no such thing as quote unquote science-based lifting. Like you just lifted. There were like a lot of online forums and a lot of YouTubers and old books and stuff that I would read, and I was never really concerned. I really didn't care if that person got this information from a study or they just tried it in the gym and it seemed to work for them. Like I was just like, hey, that's actually really interesting. I might try that myself and see what happens. And so the whole science-based lifting thing wasn't even a thing at that point. And then when I was in college, which was I started college in 2015 and then graduated college in 2019. Kind of as I was coming out of college, that's when I started to see this trend of like more research-based lifting or science-based lifting where these content creators were really leaning into like, okay, what do the studies say? What does the latest research say? And I think a lot of that stuff has been really helpful because it does kind of like sift through a lot of the BS that's out there. However, I also think that there's a downside to that because most of what the studies are actually showing is stuff that we've already been doing for at least a decade, if not much longer than a decade. So, a lot of like the hypertrophy research that's coming out, some of the stuff that they say is like, yeah, Arnold was doing that back in the day. Like we already know that. We just didn't have a study, like a peer-reviewed study or like a controlled trial to prove that. It's like, we have all this anecdotal evidence of like, look at all these bodybuilders that did that and got crazy jacked. Oh, hey, would you look at that? 30 years later, the studies say that this stuff works. So I think that can be a problem because if you're always waiting on a new study to tell you what to do, I think you are going to be behind the times a little bit. And then I don't know if this is more so like a problem due to social media or more of a problem that's sprouted up because of the science-based lifting community. And maybe there's a little bit of both there. They should kind of share that responsibility. But I've just found that people don't take responsibility or take control over their training anymore. One of my best friends, Andrew Zaragoza, he was on a podcast and he said, like, I just see too many people that have an NPC mentality, where they're constantly waiting for someone to tell them what to do. They're constantly waiting for someone else to say it's okay to do 15 reps per set versus 10 reps per set. They're constantly waiting for some other authority figure to tell them what's right and wrong when it comes to their training. And I thought that was genius. Like, yes, that's right. People are being NPCs. And that is why I'm so passionate about helping people take back control of their training. That's entirely what we focus on at the Strength Matrix. Is the whole point of the Strength Matrix and the Strength Matrix training app is to help you take back control of your training. We are going to use science-based research and, quote unquote, science-based lifting, looking at the data and all that stuff. We will definitely use some of that to influence how we back up some of our claims or how we take certain directions in training, but that isn't the foundation of what we do. There are certain things that I have used in training for at least like the last 6 years that I don't think there's a scientific study that's been published about some particular things, but I know they work. They've worked for me, and I've repeated that success with many, many, many athletes that I've coached. So I can look at it on one hand and say, well, there's no study yet that proves that this is effective. Yet on the other hand, I've been able to repeat this over and over and over again with at least like 30 different grapplers that I've coached. So which one's right? A lot of times I think the people that rely a little too much on science-based lifting, and even that term science-based lifting I think can be a little misguided, but people that rely a little bit too much on what the science says oftentimes aren't really coaching that often. And once you start coaching, that's not to say that when you coach people in person, when you work with, hundreds of different athletes over the course of many, many years, that's not to say that the science gets thrown out the window, but you do start to recognize the science can be a little bit limiting if that's the only view that you look at training through or look at training at. So all that being said, I would say that it's important that you respect what the data is showing, respect what the science is saying, but at the end of the day, don't be an NPC and take back control of your training. Next question from Anthony. Best training split if I can only go to the gym 2 times a week, mainly because I do no-gi training 4 times a week. So if your goal is to maximize muscle growth and you only have 2 days to go to the gym, I'll be completely honest. You can definitely stimulate some muscle growth, but it would be better if you went to the gym a little bit more often. But that may not be your priority right now. Your priority may be to, hey, I only have 6 available training sessions that I can do in my weekly schedule. And I am really prioritizing 4 of those session blocks to go to Jiu Jitsu. I got 2 remaining. What can I do in the gym to build muscle? And if that's the case, then that's totally fine. So the best training split, if you're training twice a week in the gym, I would just say do 2 full body sessions. There's a couple different ways that you can structure those, but I would say do 2 full body workouts. There's some good data out there as far as like, hey, what is the range of training volume to stimulate muscle growth? And most researchers have found that like if you're hitting each muscle group hard for about 10 to 20 sets per week, that's pretty solid. Like you're gonna see some positive hypertrophy stimulus. You're gonna be able to build some muscle. If you're doing only 10 sets per muscle group per week, you may not build as much muscle as opposed to if you were doing 20 sets per muscle group per week, but that is kind of the range. So if you took the minimum of that, where you're doing 10 sets per muscle group per week, that's pretty solid. That's 5 sets per muscle group per week on one workout, 5 sets per muscle group per week on the other workout. And there's a lot of different ways that you can structure that. For me personally, I like to do what's called a condensed conjugate split. So, we use the max effort method, we use the dynamic effort method, and the repetition effort method. I have a ton of YouTube videos and podcast episodes breaking down condensed conjugate, the condensed conjugate split. I've done videos with Phil DeRue, who's the inventor of the condensed conjugate split. So I won't answer too many conjugate questions in this podcast because we'll have to save that for another podcast. But if your goal is to build muscle, I'd say on day 1, start the workout with some sort of squat. Get, couple, like 3 sets, so to speak, of a quad dominant squat. So you hit your quads for 3 sets, and then maybe you do a quad dominant like split squat or unilateral squat. So that way you're not just always squatting on 2 legs. You do leg exercises that take you outside of that, feet next to each other position. You do that split stance position. So say you do 3 sets, 3 heavy sets on squats, then you follow that up with like a quad dominant Bulgarian split squat. So there are your 5 sets for quads right there. You do, 2 to 3 heavy sets on regular squats, 2 to 3 heavy sets for Bulgarian split squats. Then I would move on to something for the hamstrings. That could be like a dumbbell RDL or a stiff leg deadlift. You can do all 5 sets of that particular exercise right there. With hamstrings, I like to train them a couple different ways throughout the week. One day throughout the week, I like to do a loaded stretch on the hamstring, so like a hip hinging movement, like an RDL, stiff leg deadlift, snatch grip deadlift, stuff like that. And then on the other day, I like to do knee flexion based hamstring exercises. So lying leg curl, seated leg curl. You could even mix in lunges a little bit in there. Lunges do kind of attack the hamstrings a little bit. But for that first workout, say you do 3 sets of squats, 2 sets of Bulgarian split squats, 5 sets of dumbbell RDLs, that kind of covers your lower body pretty good. Of course, you're still getting some glutes in there as well. If you wanted to do some glute-specific stuff, want to get a little freaky, do some glute-specific stuff, you totally can. But then I'd move up to the upper body. I'd do like 1 push exercise for 5 sets. So say you do dumbbell bench press, 5 sets of 10, then you follow that up with some sort of row for 5 sets, and then you just, pick something for your biceps, pick something for your triceps. Boom, that's the first workout. The next workout, I would change it up a little bit. So on day 2, instead of doing a bilateral squat, I would do something that kind of takes your feet out a little bit wider and helps engage a little bit more of your hips. So maybe like a Cossack squat, where you're still getting some quad emphasis in there as well, but you're also training the adductors. You can do 2 to 3 sets of that and then follow it up with a like leg press for your quads or something like that. We did a loaded stretch hamstring exercise in day 1. So in day 2, I personally would probably pick a knee flexion based hamstring exercise like a lying leg curl. You can knock out 5 sets right there. We did horizontal pulling and horizontal pressing on day 1. So on day 2, I would probably suggest doing vertical pulling and vertical pressing, and then I would follow that up again with biceps, triceps, maybe some shoulders and some neck work in there, and then that's pretty much your training split. So hope that answers your question. Again, if you only have 2 times per week to go to the gym, like there is a cap, because if you were able to go to the gym 3 times per week, there's a pretty strong argument that you would see even greater gains. But again, if your priority right now is to train jiu-jitsu, you could still get a ton of good progress and a really great training stimulus even going to the gym 2 times per week. All right, next question. A question from HXZZABJJ. No one talks enough about how many calories you need to eat as a jiu-jitsu athlete when building muscle. This is a fantastic point, because you're right. There's a lot of guys that talk about the actual workouts. They don't talk enough about the nutrition. And I'm currently building out a brand new training course inside the Strength Matrix training app called Matt Jacked. And I have a very specific nutrition protocol that has worked fantastic for all the grapplers I've used it with when they're trying to pack on slabs of muscle. It's super easy to follow. It does require you to track your macros a little bit, and I'll break that a little bit down right now. But that's all part of the new upcoming Matt Jack's training course, which should be dropping here any week now. But you're right, yeah, no one talks enough about the nutritional components of rolling hard on the mat and trying to build muscle. Nutrition is not just about providing your body with enough fuel for the training sessions that you're doing, but also providing your body with the nutrients that are required for recovery. At a base level, I would suggest, following these 3 nutritional tenets. Like everything I talk about with nutrition all comes down to these 3 things, and then we can make changes and adjustments based on whatever your particular training goals are, or if your training goal is to build muscle. The first one is to eat what has a mom or comes from the ground. Basically, eat real food. I'm not a processed food hater, or I'm not here to demonize processed food or anything like that, but if you want to feel and perform your best in the gym and on the mat, Eating real nutrient-dense whole food is gonna do a lot better than nutrient-deficient, overly processed food. So, number one, eat what has a mom or comes from the ground. Number two, consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. I don't care if your goal is to build muscle, get faster, get stronger, prep for competition, whatever the case may be, if you get in 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, you're golden. Super easy math. I hate doing math. So if I just step on the scale, it's like, hey, I weigh 177 pounds. Guess how much protein I'm eating today? 177 grams of protein. Makes it super easy. And then number three, if it comes in a box, bag, or can and has more than 3 ingredients, I'd suggest trying to find something else to eat. Again, I'm not trying to demonize processed food. I'm not a processed food hater. I definitely think there's a time and place to enjoy some treats and things like that. But if the goal is to feel and perform your best, you want the vast majority of your food or the vast majority of your calories that come from nutrient-dense whole food sources. And if it comes in a box, bag, or can and has more than 3 ingredients, I'm pretty sure there's some other options out there that can meet your nutritional requirements that are closer to whole food sources. So regardless if you're trying to get jacked and build muscle or if you're trying to decrease body fat, I would stick with those 3 nutritional tenets. Now, what we didn't talk about is total calorie intake. If your goal is to pack on slabs of muscle, you do need to be in a little bit of a caloric surplus. It's going to be incredibly difficult for your body to build new muscle tissue if you are in a severe calorie deficit. And so an easy way to kind of calculate your total calorie intake and your macros and all that stuff is, this is something that I picked up from Dan Garner, who is Sugar Sean O'Malley's nutritionist. He said, take your body weight, multiply it by 15. That's probably pretty close to what your maintenance calorie needs are. So for me, if I weigh 177 and we pull the calculator out, 177 times 15 equals 2,655. So 2,655 is about an average, pretty close estimate of what my maintenance calories are. So that is, maintenance basically just means that's how many calories I need to consume each and every single day to stay the same body weight. Now, if we want to grow, we want to pack on slabs of muscle, and we're also rolling hard on the mat, we're going to have to consume a little bit more calories to sustain the growth of new muscle tissue and provide our bodies with enough fuel for the training that we're doing in the gym and the training that we're doing on the mat. And so again, this is something that I picked up from Dan Garner. Maintenance calories would be your body weight times 15. Calorie surplus would be your body weight times 16. So we do 177 times 16. That comes out to 2,832 calories. So every day I need to average about 2,832 calories to stay within that caloric surplus. Again, this is just an estimate. The best way to know if that this is actually a true surplus or true maintenance calories is to weigh myself every day and then track the progress of my weight gain or of my weight maintenance. Now, how you structure your macros based upon that caloric intake is going to change on a variety of different factors, and that's stuff that we go over in the upcoming Matt Jacked training course. But ideally, you want to have still, when it comes to your macros, that's separated into protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Still want to get in about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and then you would tweak your fat intake and your carbohydrate intake based on your training days, based on your overall training goals, and a little bit based on your own personal preferences, which again, this is all stuff that I break down further in the Matt Jacked training course. Next question from my boy Zach. What's good, Zach? #1 training partner in the game right now. How much does timing matter for food intake? Do I need to eat before lifting heavy or after? Okay, awesome question. So if the goal is to build muscle, or really any training goal, we want to make sure that the training sessions that we do in the gym and on the mat, we want to do things that allow those to have the greatest stimulus possible. So for example, if you wanted to get better at Jiu Jitsu, you would do things that help you be a little bit better prepared to have a great jiu-jitsu training session. You would probably get a good night's sleep the day before. You would probably drink plenty of water so you don't cramp up. You would probably do a little bit of mobility work. That way you're feeling kind of loose by the time you step on the mat. All these things, all these little habits contribute into you having a better jiu-jitsu session. If you have a better overall jiu-jitsu training session, that leads to a greater overall training stimulus, which you repeat that process multiple times per week across multiple months and many years, you're gonna get really, really good at jiu-jitsu. Now, the stuff that we do in the gym works the same way. So we want to make sure that we're doing things that allow us to get a little bit better of a workout, because if we can get a little bit better of a workout, we're gonna have an overall greater training stimulus, our body's gonna recover from that, and ultimately make a greater training adaptation. So, when it comes to should you eat before you lift, I used to train fasted all the time. I used to wake up, slam some coffee, go to the gym, completely on an empty stomach. I'd usually have like a big meal the night before, so I wasn't like fully depleted or anything like that. But then I did a couple consult calls with this guy who's wicked smart. And he was telling me like, hey, you should probably think about having a pre-training meal, especially if you're training multiple times per day. And I was like, all right, shoot, I'll do it. I started having that pre-training meal, and dude, let me tell you, all my workouts were instantly better. And I was kind of like kicking myself thinking like, why wasn't I doing this before? Like, what was I thinking? And so I'll put it this way. The meal that you have right before you go lift is not going to be the thing that makes or breaks your training session, but it can just be an additional thing that you add in that helps your training sessions just have a little bit more oomph behind them. And so having something like easily digestible carbohydrates, plenty of water, and some electrolytes can be fantastic for helping your body have a little bit more fuel, helping your body be a little bit more prepared to push even harder during the workouts that you do in the gym. Now, as far as timing goes, the timing of your pre and post training meals is just going to depend on what you have going on that day and what time you're going to the gym. So if you are someone like myself who trains first thing in the morning, I don't have a whole lot of time to eat a big meal and digest that meal completely and then go to the gym. So I need something that I can eat that digests very, very, very fast and is not gonna be giving me the bubble guts while I'm trying to do squats. And so for me, that's oftentimes just honey. So usually right before I go to the gym, I have a couple tablespoons of honey. I ran out of honey this week, so I've been down in maple syrup, which is like the most Canadian thing ever. I'm not even Canadian, but anyways, some like honey, maple syrup. I haven't tried agave, but agave might work. Those are packed with carbohydrates. They digest insanely fast. And those are things that you can use for some quick energy if you're waking up and then within the hour starting your workout at the gym. If you're training a little bit later in the day, things can look a little bit different because you have more time to get in food and digest everything before you go to the gym. So say you train in the afternoon, you might be able to have some forms of carbohydrates that are a little bit slower digesting and maybe even have a little bit more fat in your pre-training meal because you do have more time to be able to digest everything. So say you train at 3 o'clock and at lunchtime you have like some ground beef or some steak, rice, and potatoes. So it's like you have lunch around 12, you're training at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you got 3 to 4 hours to digest that meal before you go hit the gym. If I had steak, potatoes, and rice at 3:30 in the morning before I go to the gym, I'd probably puke. Obviously, it's not gonna work out great. So meal timing does have an impact because you wanna make sure that you're consuming foods that pair well with how much time you have before you gotta either get under the bar and start squatting heavy or step onto the mat and start rolling hard. And then when it comes to how much food not just how much food you're eating, but meal timing post lifting, if that's the only training session you're doing in the day, you don't necessarily have to put a whole ton of emphasis on eating immediately when the workout's done, because you only have one workout that day. So, if you take 30 minutes or 45 minutes before you have your post-workout meal, it's not the end of the world. However, it does become very important when you have multiple training sessions per day. If you're lifting heavy and rolling hard in the same day, you want to make sure that you are, as soon as that first training session is done, you're immediately kickstarting that recovery process and that refueling process. And usually the way I have athletes do that, like the guys that are competitors that I coach, they lift and then say they got jiu-jitsu 2 to 3 hours later, I usually have them drink a shake, like a post-workout or like an intra-workout shake towards the tail end of their workout. So that way, as soon as the workout's over, they're already starting that recovery process and that replenishment process. So that way they're getting back in calories, restoring muscle glycogen, rehydrating, restoring their electrolytes and all that stuff. So that way we can maximize the amount of refueling and recovery that we have between those 2 training sessions. So that way they feel pretty good going into that jiu-jitsu session later in the day. All right, next question from Zach. What supplements do you suggest for muscle growth? There's a couple key ones that I think are like just staples regardless of what kind of athlete you are. Creatine monohydrate is a big one. That's gonna help with muscle growth, has a lot of great stuff that it can do for your overall conditioning and brain health. 5 to 10 grams of creatine per day, fantastic. Whey protein is also pretty clutch because you want to be able to make sure you're getting in plenty of protein each and every single day. And if you're commuting, or like what I used to do, I used to work 45 minutes away from the high school that I coached wrestling at back in the day, and I had 45 minutes, but I didn't have time to like grill up a steak in the car. That would be insane. Can you imagine if someone plugged a Foreman grill into the cigarette lighter and tried cooking a steak on the freeway? That'd be nuts. So what I would oftentimes do is I would just have a protein shake as I get in the car, and then drink that on the way to go coach high school wrestling. So creatine monohydrate is a staple. Whey protein, a staple. There are some other supplements that you can look into as well. You can look into different things like L-carnitine, which can be great for overall fat oxidation and just energy utilization. I'd say with L-carnitine, your bodybuilding workouts or your muscle building workouts, even as a grappler, are going to be very dependent on your ability to use the glycogen that's within your muscle. And if you have something like L-carnitine, that can help spare some of the muscle glycogen a little bit, emphasize a little bit more usage of fat. So that way you can kind of save some of that muscle glycogen for the tail end of the workout. So I have used L-carnitine quite a bit for my own hypertrophy workouts. I use it a ton for my jiu-jitsu training sessions. So if there were 3 supplements that I'd say like are my personal favorites and ones that I've used with many of the athletes that I've coached, it'd be a creatine, whey protein, and L-carnitine. All right, last question from Zach. How do you know if you aren't recovering well? This is a great question because this kind of gets into the conversation of fatigue management and auto-regulation. Really, when we look at training, we want to make sure we're doing as much training as possible, just as long as it doesn't negatively impact our ability to recover from training session to training session and week to week. And so that's not to say that you should never be sore. That's not to say that you should never feel banged up. But a couple ways that I like to kind of monitor my own recovery is, how do I feel at the start of each week? Even if I'm training really, really hard, I want to make sure that if I start my training week on a Monday, every Monday I should feel pretty good. Like if I feel fresh on Monday, that's a good sign. I'm coming off of a full rest day on Sunday. I just previously did a whole big week of training, but it was enough of a training stimulus to produce positive results, but not so much that I'm still banged up on Monday. If you have an off Monday every once in a while, it's like, that's totally fine. But if you find that you're chronically not excited to train, chronically underperforming, so you're not increasing weights or increasing the weights that you're using in the gym from week to week, if you're experiencing some chronic fatigue, or you just have lost some of that pop when you train in the gym or on the mat, that could be a sign that you're under recovering, or you're not doing enough recovery work to match what you're doing on the mat and in the gym. And there are certain things that you can do. When I was talking with DeAndre Corby, he won the Zapatero Invitational, the $100,000 tournament. He also won ADCC West Coast Trials, and he's on Team Misfits America. for CGI2. I talked with him last year, and he talked about how his coach, Rob Wilson, has subjective and objective measurements of recovery and performance. Subjective measures would be like, hey, mentally, how are you doing today? Do you feel excited to train? Are you frustrated about anything? Do you feel depressed about anything? Do you feel encouraged and optimistic about your results over the last few weeks of training? Do you feel hopeful for the future? All that stuff. Now, objective measurements of how well you're ready to perform would be like your maximum grip strength. You might have seen some videos where people test their max grip strength before every training session to get an indicator of like, okay, how recovered am I? How ready am I for this training session? You can look at max grip strength. You can look at resting heart rate variability, max broad jump or max vertical jump. And you would want to use a combination of subjective measurements and objective measurements to give you a little bit of an idea of how well am I recovered for this week of training or for this training session. So for example, if you say you have an argument with your girlfriend or something, and you wake up the next day and you're like, it's just kind of weighing on you mentally, and you're like, man, I don't feel excited to train at all. Like I got this like argument that's weighing on me right now. But I look at some of my objective data, and it's like, well, my resting heart rate's pretty low. My HRV score is looking pretty good. My grip strength is, I didn't hit a PR on grip strength, but it's at like 95% of what it's normally at. It's like, objectively, all the data is showing that I'm still ready to train freaking hard today. That may be a scenario where the data from the subjective measures and the objective measures don't necessarily correlate, and you'd have to make that decision on your own of like, okay, am I going to still push myself today because the objective data says that I can, or am I going to lean more into how I'm just mentally feeling and go a little bit lighter today? If that's something you can do day to day. And the other indicator that you're not recovering as enough or as much as you need to be would be if you are seeing a decreasing trend in progress. So if week after week you're not getting stronger, if week after week you're not getting faster, if you're not making progress in jiu-jitsu, yeah, that would be a sign that you're not recovering enough. And when I start working with new athletes, like a lot of athletes that I start coaching one-on-one come to me because they feel like they've hit plateaus, or they say like, hey, Coach Jay, like, I think I'm doing all the right stuff. Like I'm getting good sleep. I take my vitamins. I take my Fred Flintstone vitamin. I'm going to jiu-jitsu multiple times per week. I work out, but for whatever reason, I feel like I'm not seeing any progress. And usually how it works is like someone will reach out and I schedule a consult call with them just to ask them some questions. And most of the time when these one-on-one athletes come to me, I often find that they're just under-recovered from all the work that they're doing in the gym and on the mat. They love training. They're like me, like they freaking love to lift heavy and they love to roll hard, yet they are struggling to recover from all the work that they're doing. And so sometimes what I'll do when I first start working with somebody is like, hey, for the next 6 weeks, we're really going to dial things back a little bit. We're going to get your nutrition on point. We're going to look at your blood work, make sure that you don't have any hormonal issues that are negatively impacting your recovery. So that way we can fix those right away and get you on track to recovering a lot faster. We're going to fix your sleep, make sure that your sleep is on point. We're still going to roll hard on the mat. We're still going to get after it in the gym. But really what's most important is just building habits and structure around your recovery. And usually within 4 to 6 weeks, they start feeling absolutely fantastic. And then once you have your recovery, like all the bases covered with your recovery, you can really start cranking up the intensity on your training. Because remember, it's not about what you do in the gym or on the mat that leads to progress. It's about what you do and can still recover from. If you're able to lift heavy in the morning, roll hard at night, but then you only sleep 4 hours, it's like good luck making progress of any of the training that you did on that day, as opposed to someone that lifts heavy in the morning, rolls hard at night, gets an amazing night of sleep, their nutrition is on point, they're hitting all their macros, they're getting in plenty of protein, they're able to get as much benefit as possible out of that training session and then continue to stack that day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. So I hope that answers your question, Zach. Next question from Jose. Do lateral raises help with performance on the mat, or is it for aesthetic purposes only? Questions like these, I think I understand the sentiment behind it, but sometimes I think these questions are focusing a little bit too much on the wrong thing. So the lateral raise exercise, a lot of bodybuilders do a lot of lateral raises. I do a lot of lateral raises. And I think it's important to look at it within the context of like, okay, how does a lateral raise help? How does it hurt? And is there like a time and place to implement this exercise into an athlete's training? I think lateral raises can be great for building up the size of someone's shoulders and delts. I think that's fantastic. If you got big shoulders, a bigger muscle tends to have a greater potential to get stronger compared to a smaller muscle. If you have bigger muscles, you tend to be a little bit more durable than athletes with no muscle at all. So yeah, getting bigger capped delts, I think is fantastic. If that's the only type of shoulder training that you only do lateral raises, that is limiting in how well your shoulders are developed to handle the stressors of jiu-jitsu. So there is some aesthetic benefits to doing lateral raises. I would say there's also some, I hate using the term functional, but I'd say some functional benefits to doing lateral raises because you are doing, shoulder abduction, which can be beneficial. But it's also important that no singular exercise becomes like the main focus of all someone does. Someone asked me a question on Instagram. He's one of my training partners. He said, "Hey, I'm doing Zercher squats. Do I need to do back squats?" And I said, kind of depends. And he's like, "Well, should I just get rid of them if I don't need to do them?" It's like, well, I wouldn't say you should get rid of back squats. I think there's pros and cons to Zercher squats and back squats, but right now, as you're prepping for Masters Worlds, Zercher squats seem to be doing great for you. So if that's working great right now, I wouldn't really change anything. If you start to find that I'm doing Zercher squats, but I'm kind of limited in how much weight I could squat because of my elbows. My legs feel fresh. It's my elbows that are giving out before my legs do. If that's the case, it's back squats might be a much better idea because you can load up more weight for your lower body and not be limited by what you're holding in your elbows. So the same kind of logic and the same kind of thought process in my mind gets applied to something like lateral raises. It helps in these ways where it can make your shoulders bigger, strengthen shoulder abduction. The only ways that it would hurt would be if that's the only type of exercise that you do, or if you do lateral raises and they are painful on your shoulders because you have some type of previous shoulder injury, then yeah, that might be a little bit of a problem. All right, next question. From Kaiser Soze. I'm just kidding, not Kaiser Soze. That'd be crazy if Kaiser Soze was in the Q&A. This is from Kaiser Sheldon. Maybe that's what Kaiser Soze ended up changing his name to after the movie. All right, I'll tell you guys this. Whoever can tell me what movie the character Kaiser Soze is from, I'll give you something. I'll give you a free internet hug or a free internet fist bump. So yeah, if you know what Kaiser Soze is in reference to, make sure you drop it in the comments. All right, back to business now. So Kaiser Sheldon asks, testosterone decreasing by overtraining with weights, sprints, training, etc. Trying to manage the workload and recovery of lifting, training, BJJ plus MMA daily, building muscle, also trying to, okay. So, sorry, all right, I think I understand the question now. So, basically, how to prevent the decreasing of testosterone with overtraining by doing weight training, sprinting, training MMA, jiu-jitsu, all that stuff. So, really, Kaiser, a lot of this comes down to your overall recovery. And the three pillars of recovery that I look at are sleep, nutrition, and periodization, or your training schedule. So if you are doing a ton of training in MMA, ton of jiu-jitsu training, you're lifting heavy, you're sprinting fast and all that stuff, but you're not recovering very well, yeah, your testosterone is going to crash pretty hard because testosterone is largely impacted by your sleep. Now, the next thing that's going to drastically impact your testosterone is going to be your nutrition. If you're eating a very nutrient deficient diet where you're not getting in plenty of protein, you're not getting in enough healthy fats, you're not getting in enough variety of micronutrients that further help contribute to hormone production, yeah, your testosterone is going to be pretty tanked. And I'd say like those two things together are oftentimes like the biggest culprits of why young athletes tend to have pretty terrible testosterone. Training schedule has a lot less of an impact on testosterone, I would say, but it can be part of that debacle, so to speak. Like if every single day you're going balls to the wall, like all gas, no brakes, every single training session, 7 days a week, it's just impossible to recover from that on a long-term level. So that's oftentimes why you start to see your testosterone decreasing. So if you're worried about your testosterone lowering because of all the training that you're doing, first thing I would look at is your overall sleep habits and your overall nutrition. After that, I think it's really beneficial to get your blood work done. I've worked with a company for a long time now called Health, and they make it really easy for you to just order your labs online. You can look at all, like get a full hormonal panel, look at testosterone, free testosterone, FSH, and all that stuff. Like all the things that you need to get a good look at, like, hey, what is the overall health of my hormones? What's that looking like right now? You can go through them, and then you can also use their guided optimization service, which is where you have one of their experts read off your data and give an in-depth analysis of where you're at. And the reason why I prefer to use them is because there was a time where I was actually in college, which makes sense why my testosterone was absolutely crushed, among other things. But I was super stressed out because of school. I was hardly sleeping. I was only sleeping like 4 to 5 hours a night. I was working a ton, and I just felt awful. Like I wasn't making any progress in my lifting. I wasn't making any progress in school and Jiu Jitsu. Like everything was a mess. And I got a little bit of blood work done just through my regular doctor. And they looked at it, and they're like, yeah, everything's, nothing's in the red, so you're all good to go. It's like, what are you talking about, dog? Like, I feel awful right now. And so I started doing a little bit of my own research, and I looked at the levels, and like the range for some of these blood markers are so huge. And for a couple of my blood markers, they were like 2 points above what would be considered in the red. But because nothing was technically in the red, they're like, oh, you're probably fine. It's like, dog, I'm telling you, I don't feel fine. I feel awful right now. So using a company like Health has been really helpful for me, mainly because I can order my lab work. It's super easy. I can have them look at it. They understand my training goals. They understand what it's like to be someone that wants to not just be quote unquote healthy by average American standards, but fully optimize my health and fully optimize my performance. And then they can look at different things like, hey, yeah, your testosterone here, it's not in the red, but for someone that wants to fully optimize performance in the gym and on the mat, we should probably drive that up. And there's a couple things that you can do to fix that and all that good stuff. So to answer your question, Kaiser Soze or Kaiser Sheldon, I'd say like get your sleep fixed, get your nutrition on point. Both of those two things can be done by checking out the Strength Matrix training app and the free training course, Grappler Accelerator. I got a ton of free resources in that training course to help you specifically with your nutrition and your sleep. And then I'd also look into Health, ordering some lab work, having them take a look at it, and all that good stuff. All right. Next question about how to build muscle while also trying to maintain flexibility. And then the follow-up question, how to build muscle while training with soreness that comes from the muscle growth. So first question about building muscle and maintaining flexibility. You just got to make sure you're doing your mobility work. A lot of people, I'd say wrongly, claim that like, oh, bodybuilding training makes you stiff, it makes you inflexible. It's like, I've never seen that to be true. The thing that makes people stiff and inflexible is not working on their mobility. I know there are 2 guys I'm thinking of right now, both Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts, both pro bodybuilders that are both more flexible and mobile than me. and they both outweigh me by at least like 50 pounds. One of them is almost 100 pounds heavier than me. They are so big and so jacked and crazy, crazy flexible. Jimmy House and Sima Yang. I think both guys can do the splits, and they're huge. They're so jacked, and yet they got mobility that's better than most people that I see at Jiu Jitsu. And why is that? Well, they just make sure that they continue to work on their mobility, they continue to work on their flexibility, while they're also doing their more traditional, quote unquote, muscle building training. So building muscle isn't what makes you inflexible, just neglecting your flexibility and mobility work is what makes you inflexible. Now, the next question, or the follow-up question about how to deal with training in the gym and on the mat, especially if your goal is to build muscle, how to deal with the soreness that comes afterwards. And a lot of that has to do with your overall recovery. So if you are doing a really hard workout in the gym and you get a great night of sleep, remember there are 3 foundational components to recovery: sleep, nutrition, and periodization. Those first 2, if you do a really, really hard workout and you get a great night of sleep, that is going to help at least a little bit with some of the soreness that you're going to experience the next day. If you have a well-structured nutritional plan, then make sure you're getting in the proper macro and micronutrients to assist in your recovery. That's also going to help decrease some of that overall soreness. Third, periodization. If you are intentionally doing a really, really high intensity workout where you are going to be completely blasted and super sore the next day, probably go to jiu-jitsu with the intention to not train as hard, so that way you give your body a little bit of a break from the high intensity training as it's recovering from that residual soreness. So if you take care of those 3 things, you're going to be all right. I just went through them, so I know I've been talking about it a lot, but I'm just so excited to release it to you guys. But the Mat Jacked training course is almost done, and the strength and conditioning portion of that training course are the exact workouts that I followed, and they're the exact same. They use all the same training principles that I use for my own training and the athletes that I coach one-on-one to help them build muscle while also training jiu-jitsu multiple times per week. And when I was going through the Mat Jacked training course, I was sore. There were plenty of days where I was sore, and I just kept training. And I just made adjustments to my training based on what I was physically prepared to do for that day. So for example, if I do a really hard leg workout on Monday, and then I go to jiu-jitsu on Tuesday, usually I was a little bit sore on Tuesday. Not like so sore I couldn't walk or anything like that, but I was a little tight. I was a little sore on Tuesday. And so Tuesday was intentionally a little bit of a lighter training session. Wednesday, I do an upper body workout. Wasn't like the most difficult workout ever, but still felt pretty good. Thursday, usually by Thursday, I was feeling pretty fresh. Like Thursday, I was feeling awesome. So Thursdays were like my comp days. I don't compete in jiu-jitsu anymore, but if I was, like, I treated Thursday like, yeah, I'm competing on Thursday. And so I'd roll with the toughest training partners. Like Thursdays were just gangbusters. I'd roll really, really hard. And I felt pretty good to do that because I wasn't sore anymore from Monday. Friday, I'd do like another big bodybuilding workout. And then Saturday, sometimes I'd go to jiu-jitsu, sometimes I wouldn't. But if I did go to jiu-jitsu on Saturday, I would just kind of play it by feel based on how I felt that day. Sometimes on Saturday I was really sore, sometimes I wasn't. And if I was really, really sore, I would just dial back the training that I was doing just a little bit. If I wasn't as sore and I felt like, hey, I can strike now while the iron's hot, then yeah, I would go for it. You are going to be sore. If your goal is to maximize muscle growth, if your goal is to pack on slabs of muscle so you can be a better grappling athlete, there are going to be days where you're sore. And my suggestion would be just deal with it. And by dealing with it, I'm saying just make some slight adjustments to your training to match what you're physically prepared to do for that day. Lift heavy, roll hard, train hard, recover harder. If you stick with those, that idea of like, hey, I'm going to train really freaking hard, but then I'm also going to apply the same level of intensity and focus to my recovery, you're going to be all right. Let's do one more question and then we'll call it a day. All right. Is doing low rep, high weight better or worse for lifting plus training for energy? So that's a good question. When it comes to muscle growth, this is kind of like what I talked about at the beginning of the episode. There are 4 main things, or if there was like a muscle growth checklist, there are 4 main things that you want to look for. You want to get tons of mechanical tension on the muscle. You want to take things pretty close to failure, like within 1 to 2 reps away from failure. You want to have at least somewhat of some metabolic stress where you have a pretty good pump in your workout, and you want to work through a full range of motion. So as long as those 4 things are all met, it doesn't really matter if you're doing lightweight for higher reps or heavy weight for lower reps. Heavy sets of 5 will stimulate muscle growth. Sets of 30 will also stimulate muscle growth. They do tend to have like some other secondary benefits. You know, if you're doing sets of 5, you're going to stimulate muscle growth, but you're also going to get a pretty strong strength stimulus as well. If you're doing sets of 30, you're going to stimulate muscle growth, but you also get a pretty good local muscular endurance stimulus as well. Both have benefits, and one is not better than the other. When I am working with athletes, and as I'm building out the Matt Jacked training course, in the strength ignition portion of that course, there are plenty of workouts that use really, really heavy weights for only 5 to 8 reps, and there are other exercises even within the same workout that do sets of like 25 to 30. So both can work really, really well. And there's a lot of things that go into why you would use one over the other. For heavy sets of 5, that works really well for big compound lifts, squats, bench press, deadlift, bent over rows, pull downs, all that stuff. It doesn't really work so well for higher rep exercises. If you're going to do a set of 30 on squats, your legs could probably handle it, but there might be a chance that your low back gives out before you even reach the threshold of taxing your legs. However, if you were to do a really, really heavy set of 5 on a barbell skull crusher, I don't know about you, but my elbows would be screaming and saying like, look dog, like what are you doing? Like we don't like doing heavy sets of 5 on skull crushers. Our elbows are too banged up for that. However, if I do sets of 20 on barbell skull crushers, my elbows feel fine. So that's not to say that you should only do heavy weight, low reps with compound lifts, and then only high rep lightweight with isolation lifts. Just understand that there's a range. As long as you're meeting those 4 criteria, mechanical tension, a little bit of metabolic stress, getting pretty close to failure within 1 to 2 reps away from failure, and working through a full range of motion, you can use those 4 criteria at the low end of the muscle building spectrum of 5 to 8 reps per set. You can also use those 4 criteria at the higher end of the muscle building spectrum at 25 to 30 reps per set. And that's the beauty of learning these training principles, is that, again, it's like in the Matrix when Neo, at the end of the movie, he doesn't just see the agents anymore. He just sees all the code. Once you see all the code in the Matrix, you're golden. You can start, flying like Matrix and, fly off screen to the Rage Against the Machine song. But I really do look at training like that. I think, to kind of circle back to that earlier question about the science-based lifting, I think science-based lifting has shined a light on what works really, really well and how things are happening within the body. Like, what are the physiological processes that the body's going through to cause this thing to happen? The downside is that sometimes people only look at that as being the only way to do things. And I oftentimes think that there's probably a lot more nuance that goes into a lot of these things. And so if you understand those 4 things on that hypertrophy checklist, if you will, and if you understand how to use them, whether you're using heavy weights or lighter weights, you're going to be able to stimulate muscle growth. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the podcast. You guys sent in so many questions, I barely even got through all of them. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna record another Q&A for next week to get through the rest of these. If you guys have follow-up questions about how to stimulate muscle growth as a grappling athlete, if you wanna get brutally strong, pack on slabs of muscle, and improve your conditioning to the point where you never gas out, check out the Strength Matrix training app. Start taking back control of your training. Don't be an NPC. And if you check out the Strength Matrix training app, we have a free training course on there right now called Grappler Accelerator. There's over 2,000 athletes in that training course right now, and they're already getting stronger. I got some feedback from one guy. He was saying, he's like, my wife's a doctor, and she looked at this training program, and she said, it looks great, so this training program's doctor approved. I was like, oh, shoot, man, thank you very much. I guess the training program is doctor approved. But if your goal is to get stronger, you got 30 days to do it. We have a strength and conditioning program in there that's going to help you get stronger, improve your explosive power, and help you get started on stimulating some muscle growth. Grappler Accelerator also comes with a simple and clean diet guide to help you get started on optimizing your nutrition, so that way you have fuel to train hard, but also the nutrients to recover from all of that training. And then I also put in a super sleep toolkit, so that way you can kind of take care of those three main components of your recovery: optimizing your sleep, optimizing your nutrition, optimizing your training schedule, and all that good stuff. You guys can check that out at thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler. Lift heavy, roll hard. Catch y'all later. Peace.